Go ahead and start with the third step prayer, Rob.
Okay, I'm Rob K., recovered alcoholic, and we're going to be starting on page 63 with the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way elect. I do thy will always.
All right. Well, we are on, get to that page again, had it open a while ago. We're on the second, forward to the second edition. That is page XV. XV. So we'll get started there. Rob, if we'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
There we go.
Forward to the second edition. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced a hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at its destination. Already continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities.
Yeah, we're kind of getting started here. We're going to talk a little bit about the fellowship, obviously. This has been since, 1955. What I think is interesting is that, they have started to realize at this point that there is something that's going to stick, meaning that this program has had some success and it's gaining popularity with a lot of alcoholics. I'm sure with even some that are non-alcoholics. The idea here is the 2s and 3s and 5s, I think, are, as we see it, they're going to start springing up as being, 5s and 10s and 15s. As we read, or we will read in going forward, is that some of these groups were as large as 80 people at a time. So the nice thing is that this book is getting out to alcoholics, and they're starting to take this book and starting to run their own meetings. And from there, there are people that are getting sober and recovering from alcoholism. Rob?
Yeah, this is second edition. 16 years after the first printing, the fellowship has grown by leaps and bounds, which we're going to read more about. Now, I just want you to notice something. This is the last foreword that was written by Bill Wilson. Okay, notice the we. Okay, Bill Wilson was a big proponent on it's a we program. Okay, when we read the next forewords, you're going to notice that we is not used. Okay, now Bill Wilson was had a big ego, and he kept trying to hammer the ego into check. That's why he started talking about, this person is a co-founder, that person's a co-founder. Carl Jung, Roland Hazard, this person, Dr. Bob, all he was giving credit to anybody that would walk into the room, okay, because he was trying to keep his ego in check. Also, Bill Wilson was going through depression. I believe he came out of it in 54, but he lived a life of bad depression. Illness. Really dogged him. Even though he was sober. Thing is that he kept sober, and when things got really bad, go work with another alcoholic. That's what it's going to tell us all through the book. But notice notice the we. Okay. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups, whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. A has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian country, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead.
I think there's a couple of things here that I've highlighted. One is that we are at 6,000 groups, and what's even more interesting is the 150,000 of recovered alcoholics, which if we were to kind of look at this, that means there's at least twice as many people that are involved in the program, if not more. And on top of that, they've been able to track and trace that they are having impact in other countries. So noted a couple of here with Canada, the British Isles, Scandinavia, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Australia, etc. And Rob, I know you've talked about this before. They used to have a map, I think, and they would put pins in where they were having people groups and that type of thing. Can,
Yes, they would. And this is something that they had three different colored pins. Where there was a group, where there was some person, and where somebody was looking for help. You know, an awful lot of work was put in by the people at the GSO, or what we now know as the GSO. It's just incredible amount of work. And, and don't forget, there weren't computers at this time. We take it for granted, information is like that. They painstakingly answered letters, to people that were looking for help. They'd get a letter from, we'll say, Maine, some small town in Maine, and so they would put a pin in the map that this person is looking for somebody. Then they would find out that Linda is going to be traveling, is going to go from Glasgow to Maine on a trip. So they would say, Linda, there's somebody's looking for some help. You're going to Maine. Go and drop in on this person. And she would go. She'd go with her big book in hand, maybe give it to the person, maybe. Now remember, it's 1939, early 40s, stuff like that. And so they went out of their way to find these people and to set them up, to help them out. How far are we willing to go on a 12-step call? And that's really what now we have meetings. In the Toronto area, there are meetings going on every day, every night, multiple places that we can go. In the early days, they didn't have this, so they really relied on other people to carry this message. So think about that. And I will put a picture up after I finish the next paragraph about with the showing the pins in the map. The spark that was to flare into the first A group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who would be in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by a member, and whose story in the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
yeah, so a couple of things here. The first AA group they're talking about in Akron is with uh, Bill and Dr. Bob. They as they referred to this 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. And we'll talk a lot more about the spiritual experience as we kind of go along here. There'll be at least a couple of references to that we will sit and spend some time with it. And the meeting they're talking about is the infamous meeting that took that was supposed to be 15 minutes that ended up taking over 6 hours. And then we're talking about Dr. Silkworth. Obviously, we'll learn a lot more about him in the doctor's opinion. And the there's some reference here with at first the Oxford group was a major part of the Akron group, and even to some extent the New York group, which is where Bill was at. And we haven't really gotten there yet, but nonetheless, some of the things that they adopted and translated into later as part of the program of recovery, and that is that a moral inventory, confession of personality defects, the restitution to those that are harmed. Obviously, that's steps 4, 5, 8, and 9, and helpfulness to others, which is step 12. And then the necessity of belief in and dependence upon a higher power, or God in this case, as part of the spiritual experience. So we're already learning a little bit about what's going to be a part of the program, and which is what makes it. These are the foundation tenets, if you will, of the program itself. Rob?
Yeah, now tenets are beliefs or idea or principle. Just a few things. Bill had to go back into Towns Hospital. He learned about the grave nature. And, Ebby came to him and talked about, a vital spiritual change that needed to happen, that they learned about. Now, I put a picture in the chat. I'm always putting stuff in the chat, so if you can keep an eye on it, by all means. If it bothers you, then by all means shut off the chat. That's fine too. But the idea is that Bill, what they call the alcoholic puzzle. Bill learned from Dr. Silkworth about the allergy, phenomenal craving. Okay. He also learned, about the obsession of the mind. And where did he learn that? Dr. Young. And that what needed to be done is a vital spiritual change had to happen. So, that is the alcoholic puzzle right there. And Bill knew that to work with other alcoholics was to keep him sober. So that the program basically, and this is the only page that mentions the Oxford group. The Oxford group was very vital to Bill and Dr. Bob and the people in Akron. They swore by the 4 absolutes, and they lived by them. But, this book doesn't mention the Oxford group other than that, the Oxford group wanted to save the world. Bill Wilson wanted to save the alcoholics. So they were going in 2 different directions. So it was only a matter of time before things had to break between Bill Wilson and the Oxford group, because as I say, Oxford group wanted to save the world. Bill Wilson wanted to save the drunks, because by saving the drunks, Bill was saving himself. So we're on page. Oh, go ahead, Leo.
I was just going to say, and I think too that the Oxford group was more in a socioeconomics. They wanted a bit higher socioeconomic, participant, as opposed to Bill, who said any and all. And so I think that also had caused some friction as well, if I remember right.
We got to remember in Akron, it was the, we'll say the higher class that were in the Oxford group. When Bill came back to New York, he was going to Towns Hospital, which Towns Hospital was not cheap to go into. Okay, they were charging, Bill Wilson $125 for a week. That's a lot of money in the early 30s, But Bill also was going to going to Oxford group meetings, and where they had the Calvary House, which was a mission. And so Bill was grabbing people from the mission. So yes, the Oxford group wanted the hoity-toity, or the people that had a little bit of money, because they could bring other people with them. Somebody that has an awful lot of cachet is going to make more of an impression on you. Say, Leo, come on to this meeting. I'm part of the Oxford group. Come on with me, and you might come with me, But yeah, Bill Wilson was after the low bottom drunks, or Bill Wilson was willing to help anybody. He had people living in his home. Not only Evie Thatcher, who came from a rich family who lost their money in 1929, but it's quite the dichotomy of people that Bill dealt with. That's for sure. He was hanging around with the people from the Oxford group, but yeah, the low bottom drunks too that he brought into his home. As we will read later on, Bill Cousins, a nice Canadian boy, committed suicide in Bill's house. Took the gas line and put it in his mouth and asphyxiated himself. Bill comes home from a night out at Fitzmayo's house, comes home to find a drunk dead in his home. But these are the things that they did in those days. At Dr. Bob, Eddie Riley chasing Anne, Dr. Bob's wife, around the house with a butcher knife. They brought these people into their homes. It's an incredible the lengths these people were willing to go to help somebody. It just boggles my mind. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture, which had collapsed. Leaving greatly in fear that he might start drinking again, he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician.
Yeah, and we're talking again about Bill and Dr. Bob. We're talking about Bill and his failed attempt at a business, and he was it's now the famous, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but the being in the hotel lobby, and on his right was the bar and a lot of jovial excitement and partying, and on his left was a phone and a list of churches that he could call if he felt the necessity. And so that's what he did. He decided to go left, and the rest is history now in regards to doing that. But he did, in fact, have that dilemma, and we're all obviously eternally grateful for the fact that he did what he did in finding Dr. Bob. So he took this message to Dr. Bob, which obviously helped him stay sober as well. Rob?
Yeah, the Mayflower Hotel. Thank God, that Bill made the phone call instead of going to the bar to have a couple of ginger ale, which we know would probably turn into quite a few cocktails and off in a whole different direction. So thank God that Bill took his own advice. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but it failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery.
Absolutely. And we're going to reinforce this again and again throughout the book. The idea here is that after repeated attempts to try and stop drinking on your own, using your own power finding out that you just didn't have what it took to do that. It was at that point that you were able to take Dr. Silkworth's description on the medical side as to what is, what can happen to you from alcohol, the excessive use of alcohol over a lifetime, and then taking that and having that spiritual experience and working with a higher power and bringing that into your life, and that's what that is the recipe for success. Obviously, this program and as part of the program is finding that higher power, and that work with others is what reinforces the recovery so well. And I dare say 100% of the time, anytime somebody is struggling, if they start working with another alcoholic, they suddenly find out that the struggles are lessened, if not eliminated, at least for a temporary period of time as they're going along. So the idea here is to work with others is their idea. Rob?
Right here, Bill is telling us how to stay sober, and here's another place, step 12, help another alcoholic. How many times in this book will they tell us? When everything else, when things are happening around you and you're not feeling at your best, and then you feel that, you might take a drink, what should you do? Go help another alcoholic. All through the book, it's going to tell you the same thing. When you're not feeling so good, you're feeling self-pity, what should you do? Go help another alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Bill S. from New Jersey, what has some great analogies. And, hopefully he'll tell his grass cutting story because it shows you why helping another alcoholic is so important. And, and that's what Bill learned. Big thing Bill learned is that helping another alcoholic takes you out of yourself. Okay? The book tells us we're selfish and self-centered. We have to push aside our old ideas. Okay? Ideas that were once the guiding forces in our lives are pushed to one side, and a whole new set of motives come into our life. Okay? So instead of me thinking about myself, I'm thinking about what can I do for Mark today? Mark's in San Diego, the poor guy. It's probably really hot down there. I'm going to send, a nice cool breeze down to San Diego so that, his hair can blow in the breeze and he can get that relief. Because you know what? The wind blowing through my hair is not going to help me. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first A group had actually been formed, but no one realized it at that time.
Yeah, we just didn't know quite what was going to happen with AA, and under the circumstances, it was too early for them to really see that the seed had taken root and that it was going to begin to grow and grow and grow. The third AA number 3, we're talking about Bill Dodson. His story is on page 182. But that's who we're talking about with regard to the next recovery. So it's a lot of good stuff is happening. What I think is, all the failures that they had, it's a wonder that they kept at it as fervently as they did. Again, we all owe them a debt of extreme gratitude for continuing to do that and building the Akron Fellowship, and then taking that momentum back to New York with Bill. Rob?
Yep. A second small group promptly took shape at New York. to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic.
Absolutely. And they're starting to get the idea that this is really going to stick, that there is something here. Going back to the start of the third group, third fellowship up in Cleveland was done by Clarence Snyder, just to give you some history there. And we go back to that groups of twos and threes and fives throughout the rest of New York and Ohio and some other areas, I'm sure. At this point in time, I believe that Bill and Bob counted 40 people as recovered at this juncture of the history of AA. So seems rather small at this point, but nonetheless, 40 recovered people. They took that as an indication that this program really does work, and so therefore continued on. Rob?
Yeah, slow is correct, Leo, but this is a word of mouth program right now. Okay. And so to get the word out, it's very difficult, and, just think about when we talk to people that we know and we tell them that, you might have a problem with alcohol. How long does it take them to realize that they might have a problem with alcohol and they want to do something about it? So they're carrying this message person to person. That's why they wanted to get a book out. It's because they wanted to reach more people. You know, when you come up with a new product, okay, and I only tell Leo and he tells Linda, is Linda going to tell somebody else or is it just going to stay with Linda? You need advertising. You need to get it out to a mass audience. How do we do this? Well, we're going to find out about that in a few minutes. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time.
Yeah, and I think the flying blind period that we're talking about is 1934 to about 1939. And obviously, we're talking about the publication of this book in its first volume, and the membership being reached to about 100 men and women, again, recovered alcoholics at this point. So back to what Rob had said, it was very slow growth, but very but consistent. They were persistent, I guess is a better word to use, and started seeing some success. But with this book, everything, as we're going to see, really started to take off. Rob?
Akron weren't enthusiastic about a book. They didn't think they really needed a book. They were happy with what they were doing and didn't think a book was necessary. But I'm going to put something in the chat that, and then I'll read it out. And it's the reason that Bill was so adamant, and the people in New York were so adamant about getting a book out. And this is Bill talking. I used all the arguments I had worked out the day before when talking with Dr. Bob, pointing out that we had a cure for alcoholism, but at the rate we were going, it would take another 10 years before it reached the outskirts of Akron. If you keep it too simple, I argued, we end up with nothing but anarchy, and then everything gets really complicated. If they don't get a book out or don't get the word out, nobody's going to find out. How am I going to let Linda know that we have a solution for alcoholism? If all I can do is say, well, she's over in Britain. She's too far away for me to get the message to. Leo is in Maryland. How am I going to get it to Leo? Unless I go there and I spend time with him. It's hard. So they needed the people in New York really wanted a book because they could get the message to the outskirts. Bill and Hank Parker were visionaries. They saw this thing going around the world. People in Akron were happy with what they were doing and thought everything was fine. They didn't need to go any further. I thank God that they came up with this book so that I got the message, because without the book, I might never have got the message. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Alsler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that A's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery.
Yeah, a lot of growth here. It doesn't, again, we're talking small numbers, but they are very big numbers for what was going on at the time with the AA program and with Bill and Dr. Bob. Starting to get reviews, good reviews from people like Dr. Fosdick, and then Fulton Ausler, putting the story in his magazine, got things really started to kick things off, and really got them to grow. So going from a very small number to 800 is quite a big jump, and it again, they talk about this painstakingly answering pamphlets and books, and again, the idea that sending this book out could actually have a positive impact on an individual and or a few people in a small group, and they can start to recover without the word of mouth is quite amazing. I think we've become very, very dependent, and for good reason, on sponsors and people, as well as the book and the fellowship in the program of today. Back in the time when it was an individual in some obscure place having the book, being able to read the book and finding sobriety because of that was quite amazing compared to today. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I would say that for the most part, we have melded into a recovery program where it involves the people as much as it involves the book. Rob?
I wish it involved the book more. We are at a big book study that's perfect. My in-person meetings, they don't use the big book.
Right.
And which, wasn't until I, got on Zoom and was able to find all these big book meetings that, a whole world opened up for me. I learned about what's in this book. People explained it to me. It's a textbook. It's not something that, that is easily picked up and you read it and go, oh yeah, okay, that I know everything I need to know. Yes, it is in the book, but sometimes we need people to explain it to us. What am I suffering from? Hammer at home. We're suffering from an allergy, the phenomenon of craving. And once we pick up a drink, we can't stop. Okay. And I have an obsession of the mind that says that this time it's going to be different, that I'm going to be able to drink like a gentleman. I'll be able to have a couple of drinks and stop. Well, you know what? That doesn't work. I keep doing the same thing over and over again. and I don't understand why. Okay, but it's a textbook. I need somebody to explain it to me. And you know what? I go to an awful lot of big book meetings. And the reason I do is because somebody will say something just a little bit different that makes sense. And what you go to meetings a lot of time and they go, well, when did they put that in a book? I don't remember ever seeing that. You know what? At different times, we're open to different things. You know, is it our progression along the path, or is it just that somebody said something a little bit differently that went, oh, okay, I get that. I get that. I understand that now. You know, in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Sunday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, AA numbers 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution.
Yeah, and I think at this point they are fully aware that this is a great program, that there is a lot of good stuff happening, and that they're going from 100 to 800, and then up to 2,000, and then to 8,000. You can kind of see how I can only imagine how overwhelmed this small office in New York was, with all of the inquiries and ordering of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And that story in the Saturday Evening Post, certainly having the effect on a positive nature that it did, and everything was finally solidified, and we knew at that point that we had something in our hands that was going to help the masses. So very good stuff. Rob?
Yeah, Bill, Hank Parker's, they thought that they were going to be able to get millions of dollars out of John D. Rockefeller. Little were they were very disappointed to find out that, they got a little bit of money, but nothing that would sustain them for any length of time or keep AA going. So they had to come up with ways to keep this fledgling society going. It wasn't easy, but through sheer determination, they were able to do it. Borrowing from this person and borrowing from that person, and AA paid the money back. Charles Towns was a great help in lending money to keep Bill into where he could keep writing the book. Bill never really had another job. He couldn't find work in his chosen profession. So he was basically a full-time AA person. They didn't, when the book came out, they were kicked out of their home. So they were living at the 24th Street clubhouse for a little bit of time, and then they moved around a little bit. Tough times. But they kept at it. They kept at it. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescence period. The test that it faced was this: could the large number of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene.
Yeah. So there is the struggle of growing and being somewhat decentralized by the fact that we only had the New York office, but then these groups were able to kind of start up on their own, and at the time, without having established firmly the program as it was or as it is today. A lot of rules got put in place, and it made it very difficult for some alcoholics to become a part of the program. It also made it difficult for some that were already a part of the program to stay a part of the program. So there was a lot of churn and trials and tribulations. And when we talk about schisms, we're talking about disagreements. And there was a lot of, like I said, a lot of churn and something that had to be done in order to keep the program and the fellowship together. Rob?
Well, you know what they say, all it takes to start a new group is a resentment and a coffee pot, and that's what was happening. The traditions came out because groups were writing letters to the General Service Office, or what we know as the General Service now, and writing letters saying, well, this is going on in our group, and how should we handle it? What should we do? So Bill came up with the traditions. This is what we should be doing. They would write these letters to these groups trying to stay, you guys are autonomous, you can do whatever you want. This is what another group has done. If you want to do it, by all means, but you are autonomous. You can do, your group can do whatever it wants. Okay. But they tried to come up with these things to help out each group, because they were getting inundated with all these requests. What should we do? What we're frustrated by it. Bobby Berger, the #2 secretary, spent a lot of time sending out letters after letter after letter to different groups, trying to help them out. She was Bill's right-hand man, or woman, I should say. And thank God for Bobby Berger. If you ever get a chance to read the book by Gary Nygaard on Bobby Berger, AA's great communicator, she is a fantastic, incredible woman. Tragic end to her life, but what she did for AA is just incredible. Oh well, enough about Bobby Berger. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be autonomous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies.
Yep. And this was rather genius of everybody to come up with all of this. Simplicity is really the word that I would use for what they were trying to do here. And we discovered as the principles in the 12 steps. And of those principles, we also had the 12 traditions. And out of those 12 traditions, we got what we read in this paragraph here, and that leaders may serve but never govern. Each group is to be autonomous. No professional class of therapy. Obviously, we've said this already, but we'll say it again. AA is not therapy. No dues or expenses. They should have been voluntary contributions, which we still hold dear to this day, and the based on attraction as opposed to promotion. And the anonymity had to be first and foremost to keep this part of this going on. Rob?
Yeah, the one that I really like is public you have your God, I have mine. You have your political beliefs, I have mine. I love the fact that's an outside issue. Because we all have strong feelings about certain things. Okay? But we're all here for one thing only, to stay sober. And whatever keeps you sober, that's what it's all about. Okay? But if we start bringing in all these other things, like who you want for president, who I want for president, you know, who, what God I have, you got to have the same God. No, we can agree to disagree, but we don't, we stay out of public controversies. I think that is genius of Bill Wilson, just genius. You know, the man came up with the tradition, the steps. He came up with how the general service is supposed to work, how the office is supposed to work, came up with all these things. Just incredible, so I am indebted to the man. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of the principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has.
Absolutely, and they do have meetings now every April, and that has become quite the following as well. Although I think now they do for the big conventions are now every 5 years. Is that right, Rob?
Yes.
So, and the next one's coming up in 2025. Is that correct? April?
In Vancouver.
In Vancouver, British Columbia. So a lot of good stuff happening, a lot of growth, a lot of churn, and Bill and Bob are able to keep it together, which is quite the feat in and of itself. And it is truly remarkable. Rob?
Well, the internal difficulties of our adolescence period was being ironed out. Public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large number of recovery and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed.
Yeah, this is something that we refer to, and I think it's something that is generally, and I would say that kind of loosely is still true to this day, and that is of alcoholics who came to AA, and here's the disclaimer: they really tried, meaning that they really put themselves into the program and stuff. 1 out of every 2 got sober at once. And out of that group, another 25% sobered up after some relapses, and then of the remainder showed some improvement. So we're talking about those that really tried. We're not talking about every person that's come to AA. A lot of people come to AA for different reasons. I certainly didn't come for the right reasons in the beginning for me. In fact, for several years, I went for the wrong reasons, and was not in anywhere near going to show any type of improvement whatsoever. But of those who really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among those, the remainder who stayed with AA showed some improvement. So some really kind of positive numbers there, even though we're talking about those that really, really tried with the program. Rob?
Yeah, really tried is doing the steps, not doing step 1, 2, and 3. Doing steps 1 to 12. Those are the ones that really tried. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministrations of friends of medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book.
Yeah, and we just as a disclaimer, this isn't a medical or religious program. It has support from both of those bodies, And we'll see as we go forward that with that support and that promotion from those groups, we found that AA grew faster than it would have without. Rob?
Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we do cooperate widely with the men of medicine, as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of Americans, and in distant lands, the same democratic evening out process is now going on. By personal religious affiliations, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 50% of us are women.
Yeah.
I think that's gone up a little bit, eh, Leo?
I believe it may actually be higher than 50%, but I know that it has gone up quite a bit. I would like to know what the percentage is. I do take a loose poll from time to time in meetings, and I find that it goes up and down between that 50% mark and stuff. So it's really nice that we've got the demographics that we do, including women and all of these different religious bodies and backgrounds. Rob?
And this is a great place to say that this is where we stay out of controversy. Different religions. You know, it doesn't matter your religion, you know, we're here to be sober. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of 20% per year. So far, upon a total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcoholic problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is their great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom.
Right. And we are talking about the program of AA and recovery and the program that is in this book. I would say that there are many ways to get sober. This program is only one way. It works for most alcoholics, as I would basically say. And Rob and Bill and I only work with this program in this meeting. So it's just something to say there. We have actually stagnated or leveled out, and maybe aren't growing nearly at the rate that we were back then. I think that there's some indication that we might actually be shrinking slightly. But nonetheless, there's newcomers coming in all the time, and hopefully we can sustain a certain number. Now that we're in the millions at this point, it'll take some time for this to go away, and I don't think it ever will. Rob?
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. Leo, let's bring in Bill S. from New Jersey.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, this is Bill S. from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, guys. Good job today. This is a really good forward. I like this forward probably better than all of the rest. There's a lot of information in here and a lot of history. And I just happen to be one of the people that like the history of AA. So this is talking a lot about what went on in the beginning and what happened. And it talks, like was already mentioned, it mentions the Oxford group in here. And this is the only place the book mentions the Oxford groups. So Bill put it in here, and he's given an indication that he got a lot of his ideas for the steps from the Oxford group. The Oxford group didn't have any steps themselves. People think that the Oxford group did. The Oxford group had their own spiritual exercises that they were following. And Bill used these things to formulate our steps. He got the ideas for the steps from the Oxford group. He got the idea for step one from Dr. Silkworth, because Dr. Silkworth explained to him when he drank, he would develop the phenomenon of cravings, and there's nothing he could do about it except total abstinence. And when he wasn't drinking, he would be restless, irritable, and discontented, and that would make him want to take a drink. So he got the idea of powerlessness from Dr. Silkworth, and step two probably came from Dr. Young, and then the rest of the steps, or at least the ideas for them, came from the Oxford group. And it talks about here on the second page, XVI, that he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. This is when he was in Akron, Ohio, and he was pacing the lobby in a Mayflower hotel, and he realized if he wanted to stay sober and he didn't want to get drunk, he was going to have to carry his message to another alcoholic. And that's basically the whole premise that this program is founded on, one alcoholic working with another, because that's what keeps us sober. It may help the other person get sober, or it may not, but if you carry the message to somebody, that's going to keep you sober. And then it talks on the bottom of that page, it says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. In other words, we can get through to each other when nobody else can. How many times have you had all of those people, your friends, your family, people you work with, tell you, why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Why don't you use your willpower? Why don't you think the drink through? That stuff doesn't work for us. It might work for them because they're social drinkers and they can do that. But when we talk one alcoholic to another, we identify with each other and we understand each other. We know what's going on. So we can get through to each other like nobody else can. And on the top of the next page, page XBII, it says it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. If you don't want to relapse, you need to do strenuous work with another alcoholic. And strenuous work means walk them through this course of action, walk them through the 12 steps. That's what they mean by strenuous work. And it's vital to permanent recovery. Vital means your life depends on it. So if you want to stay recovered, if you don't want to relapse, you need to work with other alcoholics. And the story I tell, Rob mentioned it, the analogy I came up with, if a guy on my block breaks his foot and now he can't cut his grass, so I volunteer to go cut his grass for him. That's a wonderful, marvelous, spiritual, godly thing to do. I'm being neighborly. I'm helping out one of my neighbors. And what's that going to do? That's going to make a really good grass cutter out of me because I'm getting more practice at cutting the grass. What that's going to do for my sobriety, I don't know. Helping another person, helping one of God's children, that kind of stuff will get you into heaven. We're not interested in you getting into heaven. We're just interested in keeping you out of hell. So if I use some of my spare time to walk somebody else through this process, this 12-step process, another alcoholic, I'm getting more practice at using the steps with another alcoholic. Now, when I'm having a rough time, when I'm on shaky ground, it'll be easier for me to incorporate the steps into my life so I don't have to pick up a drink because I had more practice at doing them with somebody else. That's why we're supposed to specifically work with other alcoholics. Again, it's a wonderful thing to help anybody. You help any of God's children, that's a wonderful thing to do. But if you want to stay sober, you better work with another alcoholic. And that's basically the point he's trying to get across to us here. And then he goes through a lot here. He explains a little bit about how the traditions came out. They realized they had to come up with these traditions because the steps keep us from killing ourselves and the traditions keep us from killing each other. Bill realized that alcoholics are going to bang heads all day long, so we had to come up with these traditions so that we would be able to, get along with each other and AA wouldn't fall apart. And it was mentioned also the growth of AA on page XX is talking about how fast we were growing at 20% a year. We're not doing that anymore. Like Leo mentioned, we're basically stagnating, and some of the surveys that they've taken even indicates that we're slightly declining. And I don't know why, but people just aren't coming to AA like they used to. Maybe it's because people are going on the internet instead of going to meetings, so they're not adding these people in. I don't know. Maybe people are finding other ways. There's other programs out there today that there wasn't when AA started. So for whatever reason, we seem to be declining, and probably because people are not using this book anymore. You go to meetings, and 90% of the stuff that you hear in meetings has nothing to do with what's in this book. People are talking about their dog and their cat and their job and their car and their relationships and all this other I know that stuff is important to people, but that's got nothing to do with your sobriety. If you want to stay sober, you need to talk about what's in this book, because that's what works and that's what keeps us sober. And it says on the last page, upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. If you can find another way to stay sober, by all means, go for it. If you go to Bible studies, if you go to Smart Recovery or whatever you want to use, if that's working for you, more power to you. This is just a way that worked with us, and that's the only way we know, and that's all we can talk about. That's pretty much all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Sir. All
Bill
right.
has his meeting on Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Information is in the chat, so if you can make it out to his meeting, you're in for a treat.
Yes, sir. And we'll close out with a serenity prayer, Rob.
Okie dokie. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.